The phone rang just as Daniel was closing his laptop, ready to unwind after a long day. He checked the time. It was nearly midnight. Only an emergency call would come in at such an hour, he thought, and a feeling of unease crept up his spine. With a slight hesitation, he picked up the phone. "Hello?" His voice was soft but wary. "Daniel," a voice on the other end said, crackling slightly. "You think Claire's out on a work trip, don't you?" He froze. The voice was a woman's, unfamiliar and cold, each word landing like a blow. "Who is this?" "Right now," the woman continued, ignoring his question, "your girlfriend is in bed with another man. Her boss, in fact. They're not at the conference she told you about." Before he could gather his thoughts to respond, the line went dead. He pulled the phone from his ear, staring at it as if it could somehow offer an explanation. Claire, his Claire. It didn't seem possible. They'd been together for nearly 5 years, lived in a cozy apartment in the middle of bustling downtown Chicago, and shared countless plans for the future. She was his rock, his partner, the person who knew him better than anyone else. The notion that she could be unfaithful was like a punch in the gut, leaving him breathless. As he sat there, processing the call, the doorbell rang. He jumped, his heart pounding, wondering if it could be Claire herself, coming home early from her trip. He hurried to the door, but when he opened it, there was no one in sight. Only a small, nondescript envelope lay on the doorstep. Daniel picked it up, feeling its weight as if it contained more than just paper. His hands trembled as he tore it open, and out slid a stack of glossy photographs. As he flipped through them, his stomach churned. There was Claire, unmistakable in her bright red dress, laughing and holding the arm of her boss, Marcus. The grainy images showed them entering a hotel together, her head leaning onto his shoulder, then a shot of them walking into a room. It couldn't be true, but the evidence lay right there in his hands. Daniel slumped against the doorframe, his mind swirling with anger, sadness, and disbelief. He wondered who had sent these pictures and why. But most of all, he wondered how long this betrayal had been going on. With trembling fingers, he dialed her number, his heart pounding harder with each passing ring. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cheery and casual. "Hey, babe, how's it going?" Daniel clenched his jaw, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where are you, Claire?" A small pause. Then, "I told you, Daniel. I'm in San Francisco for the conference." "Why?" Daniel took a deep breath, fighting to control the anger bubbling up inside him. "Cut the lies, Claire. I know you're not at a conference. I have photos of you and Marcus leaving a hotel together." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her tone was flat. "How did you get those?" "That doesn't matter," he replied, barely able to keep his voice steady. "What matters is why. Why, Claire? How could you do this to me?" She sighed, and he could practically hear her roll in her eyes through the phone. "Look, Daniel, it's complicated. I didn't mean for you to find out like this." "Complicated?" he shouted, feeling the fury surge through him. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and it's complicated." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It just happened." Daniel felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. It just happened. You don't just accidentally end up in bed with your boss, Claire. "I can't do this right now," she muttered, her voice sharp. And then she hung up. He stared at the phone, stunned, his heart aching with every beat. Claire, the woman he planned a life with, had betrayed him, and now she couldn't even face the damage she'd caused. He sank to the floor, his vision blurring as the photos scattered around him, each one a painful reminder of how easily trust could shatter. For a long time, he just sat there, consumed by a whirlwind of emotions: anger, heartbreak, disbelief. He thought about every moment they'd shared, every promise they'd made. Had it all been a lie? How long has she been hiding this affair? As he struggled to make sense of it all, his phone rang again. He glanced down, hoping it was Claire with some explanation, but instead, it was the same anonymous number from earlier. "Who are you?" he demanded as he answered. Just someone who thought you deserved to know the truth. The woman replied, her voice softer now. You deserve better, Daniel. And once again the line went dead. Daniel sat there in the silence, those last words echoing in his mind. You deserve better. But better than what? His entire life had been wrapped around Claire, and without her, he felt like he was stranded in an unfamiliar place, unsure of what to do next. That night, sleep eluded him as he lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events over and over. All he knew was that he couldn't let this betrayal destroy him. He had to find a way to move forward, to pick up the pieces of his life and find a path to healing. As the first rays of dawn broke through his window, Daniel made a decision. He would confront Claire face to face. He needed to hear the truth from her lips, to look into her eyes and find out why she'd torn their life apart. Only then could he begin to rebuild, to move on from the woman who had shattered his heart. The following morning, Daniel didn't waste any time. He showered, dressed, and went out for a strong coffee, needing all the composure he could muster before the inevitable confrontation. As he sat in the small coffee shop near his apartment, he rehearsed the words he would say, the questions he'd ask. Part of him hoped he'd misjudged everything, that she'd offer some sort of explanation that would undo the damage. But another part, a sharper, angrier part, knew the truth he'd seen in those photographs wouldn't just disappear. The coffee turned cold as he sat, turning his phone over and over in his hands, until finally, a text from Claire flashed on the screen. *K, I'm back in town. Can we talk? *. His heart hammered at those words. He took a moment to gather himself before replying. *Yes. Come over as soon as you can. *. Within half an hour, Claire was at his door. She looked the same as always, dressed neatly, her hair pulled back in that casual way he'd always admired. But now, instead of admiration, he felt a pang of anger and sadness at the sight of her. *Daniel, she started, her voice tentative as she stepped inside. I don't know what you think you know, but... He cut her off, his voice cold. Let's skip the games, Claire. You cheated on me. You lied to me. Don't waste my time trying to explain it away. For a moment, she looked taken aback, her confident demeanor faltering as she crossed her arms defensively. It's not that simple, she muttered, her gaze falling to the floor. Then explain it to me, he replied, his tone hard. Make me understand how you could do this to us. Claire took a deep breath, rubbing her temples as if searching for the right words. Fine. Yes, I slept with him, she admitted, her voice steady but her eyes distant. But it wasn't like I planned to hurt you. It just happened. Daniel clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise in his chest. It just happened. That's your excuse. She ran a hand through her hair, looking both frustrated and resigned. I was in a bad place, Daniel. You know how things have been at work. Marcus and I, we have history. Before I even met you, we were together for a while. And when things got stressful, I guess. I don't know. It just reignited something. Then why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice breaking as the pain slipped through. If you still had feelings for him, if there was a chance this could happen, why start a relationship with me at all? Her eyes flickered up to meet his, a hint of regret and guilt in their depths. Because I didn't want to lose you. You were good for me, Daniel. So good to me. And I thought it was over him. But I wasn't. So what then? He felt his voice growing louder, emotions boiling over. Was I just a pawn in your twisted game to make him jealous? To somehow make him want you back? She hesitated, then nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, at first, maybe. But then I did start to care about you. It got out of hand, and I didn't know how to get out of the lies I'd woven. The air grew thick between them, the weight of unspoken words pressing down. He could see the regret etched across her face, but it did little to lessen the hurt slicing through him. The memories of their life together, every intimate moment, now felt tainted, as though she tarnished each one with her deception. I can't do this anymore, Claire, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't be with someone who used me like that. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. Daniel, please, we can try to fix this. He shook his head, stepping back from her touch. No, Claire, you made your choice. Now you have to live with it. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at him, her eyes pleading and filled with remorse. But she didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that the damage was done, irreparable. After a few moments, she lowered her gaze and left, closing the door quietly behind her. The sound of it echoed through the apartment, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. Daniel let out a long, shaky breath as he slumped onto the couch, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with the sadness. Confronting her had been painful, yes, but it had also given him a clarity he desperately needed. He had his answer, and now he could finally begin the process of healing, free from the illusions of a relationship built on lies. But as the hours passed, the initial sense of relief faded, replaced by a simmering anger that refused to leave him. How could she have used him so easily, so carelessly, all for the sake of rekindling something of her ex? She'd shattered his trust, his sense of security, and left him questioning everything they'd shared. In the dim light of his apartment, his gaze fell on his computer. An idea began to take root in his mind, an idea that grew stronger with each passing second. He couldn't just let her walk away, leaving him in pieces while she went on with her life. She deserved to understand the pain she'd caused, to feel it herself as deeply as he was feeling it now. Without hesitation, he sat down and opened his laptop. He knew she'd often trusted him with her passwords, asking him to help set up her accounts or troubleshoot issues. Accessing her email wasn't difficult. It was disturbingly easy, in fact. With a few clicks, he was in. As he browsed through her messages, he found more than he had bargained for. Texts, emails, even photos documenting her time with Marcus. It felt like reliving the betrayal all over again, but now he had proof, a raw, undeniable record of the affair. One particular email caught his eye. It was a message to Marcus, detailing plans for an upcoming merger meeting at her office, an event where she'd be presenting to her entire team, along with potential new partners. A plan began to form in Daniel's mind, fueled by a desire for revenge that he could no longer ignore. He downloaded the photos and incriminating texts onto a flash drive, his resolve hardening with each passing moment. He would expose her for who she truly was. In front of everyone she worked with, in front of the people who respected her. She would face the consequences of her deceit, just as he had to face the pain of her betrayal. As he prepared for what lay ahead, memories of their relationship surged back, unbidden. Their first date, the night they'd moved into the apartment together, her laughter echoing through the empty rooms as they unpacked. Each memory felt like a knife twisting in his chest, a reminder of the love he'd once had for her, a love that had now turned cold. A notification on his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Claire. Asterisk, can we talk? Asterisk. He ignored it, focusing on the plan instead. He wouldn't let her manipulate him again. She'd already done enough damage. The next time they crossed paths, it would be on his terms. This time, he'd be the one in control. The following morning, Daniel arrived at her office building with a determination that steeled him against any doubts or second thoughts. He had told her he'd helped with tech setups before, so no one would question his presence. He walked confidently through the lobby, up to the floor where the meeting was being held. In the conference room, he greeted the team members and executives with a polite smile, keeping his gaze steady as he saw Claire enter. Her eyes widened slightly when she spotted him, a flash of confusion and unease crossing her face. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, coming up to him. "Just helping out with the setup," he replied, his tone casual. "Figured you could use an extra hand." She nodded, but her expression remained wary. As the room filled with executives and potential partners, he positioned himself at the back, keeping the flash drive within easy reach. This was it. The moment when he would reclaim some of the power she had taken from him, when he would make her feel the betrayal as viscerally as he did. When the time was right, he stepped forward, inserting the flash drive into the projector. He adjusted the controls, his hands steady as images flickered onto the screen. At first, there was silence, a stunned pause as the images registered. Claire and Marcus, side by side, their secret laid bare for everyone to see. The silence in the room was deafening as the images of Claire and Marcus lingered on the screen, each one a vivid reminder of the betrayal that had torn through Daniel's life. He could feel every eye in the room shifting from the images to Claire, who stood frozen at the front, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. One of the executives, a stern-looking man in a sharp suit, rose to his feet, his face turning an angry shade of red. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice breaking the silence with a hard edge. Claire glanced wildly around the room, her gaze landing on Daniel, shock and horror etched into her expression. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What have you done?" Daniel stepped forward, his face calm, but his heart pounding as he faced her. "I thought everyone deserved to know the truth, Claire. They deserve to see who you really are. The woman who pretends to be loyal, dedicated, and professional, all while lying to the people who trust her." The room erupted into a low murmur as whispers spread among the gathered executives and team members. Marcus, sitting at the far end of the table, stood up abruptly, his face a mix of embarrassment and anger. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice wavering as he glanced at Claire, then at Daniel. "This is a private matter. It has no place here." "Private?" Daniel retorted, his voice sharp and unyielding. "You both made it everyone's business the moment you started lying and deceiving those around you. People deserve to know the truth about who they're working with." Another executive, a woman with a hardened expression, crossed her arms as she looked at Claire. "Is this true, Claire? You've been having an affair with Marcus, all while pushing this merger as if nothing was wrong." Claire's face crumbled as she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But it was too late for apologies. The damage was done, and the room's mood had shifted irreversibly. Claire's colleagues and executives looked at her with a mixture of shock, disgust, and disappointment, their respect for her shattered as thoroughly as Daniel's trust had been. Daniel watched her, feeling a strange satisfaction mixed with a hollow sadness. This was the closure he'd been seeking, the justice he felt he deserved. She'd broken his trust, shattered his life, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. He had wrested back control from her deception and reclaimed his dignity, but the triumph he'd expected didn't fully materialize. Instead, he felt an emptiness, a gnawing sensation that something fundamental had been lost, something he wasn't sure he'd ever get back. As the meeting room continued to buzz with murmurs and whispers, Claire finally found the strength to look at him. Her eyes were glassy with tears, her voice choked as she whispered, "Why did you do this, Daniel?" He felt a pang of regret, but it was quickly swallowed by the anger that had driven him this far. "Why?" he replied, his voice steely. "Because you destroyed my life, Claire. You lied to me, you used me, and you never cared about the damage you caused. You left me broken, wondering how long I'd been nothing but a pawn in your game. This is the consequence of your choices." Claire's shoulders slumped, her defeated expression telling him that, for the first time, she was truly feeling the weight of what she'd done. She glanced around the room, her eyes pleading with her colleagues, but none of them offered her a word of support. Marcus, too, looked away, distancing himself as if she were nothing more than an unfortunate scandal he'd stumbled into. Finally, one of the senior executives cleared his throat, his voice cold and detached. "Claire, I think you should leave the room. We'll need to have a discussion about your future with the company." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she gathered her things, avoiding everyone's gaze. She walked toward the door, her once confident stride now shaky and uncertain. As she passed Daniel, she paused for a moment, her eyes searching his face. But he held her gaze, unyielding and unreadable, refusing to give her the comfort she was clearly seeking. With a small, defeated sigh, she walked out, leaving him standing in the silence she'd left behind. As the executives began to regroup, whispering among themselves and discussing the fallout of the morning's revelation, Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. He'd taken back the power she'd stolen from him, exposing her lies and forcing her to face the consequences. But as he left the office building, walking out into the blinding sunlight of the bustling Chicago streets, he couldn't shake the hollow feeling that clung to him. Outside, the world seemed to move on, oblivious to the chaos he just unleashed. People hurried along the sidewalks, taxis honked, and the city hummed with life, a stark contrast to the turmoil that swirled inside him. He walked aimlessly, unsure of where to go, until he found himself in a quiet park, the sound of rustling leaves and distant laughter filling the air. He sat down on a bench, his gaze unfocused as he replayed the events of the morning in his mind. The anger, the need for revenge, the satisfaction of seeing her world fall apart. All of it seemed to fade, leaving behind an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. He thought this would bring him closure, that it would help him move on. But instead, he felt as if he were left in pieces, unsure of what came next. Lost in thought, he barely noticed when a familiar voice called his name. He looked up, startled, to see Alan, one of Claire's colleagues, jogging over to him, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Daniel," Alan said, his voice tight. "What the hell was that back there?" Daniel took a deep breath, bracing himself. The truth, Alan. Everyone needed to know what kind of person Claire really is. Alan shook his head, his tone laced with frustration. "But in front of everyone? You destroyed her. There had to be a better way to handle it." "Maybe there was," Daniel admitted, his voice softer now, the edge of his anger dulled. "But it's done now. She hurt me, Alan. She shattered my trust. This was the only way I knew to make her understand what she put me through." Alan stared at him for a long moment before sighing, rubbing his temples. "I get that you're hurt. But this kind of thing, it leaves scars, Daniel. For both of you." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of Alan's words sink in. Scars. Yes, he'd left scars on Claire just as she had on him. But those wounds ran deep, and he knew it would take a long time for them to heal, if they ever did. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," Alan said, his voice softened by a touch of sympathy. "Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't always make things right." As Alan walked away, Daniel sat there, letting the words settle over him like a heavy blanket. He'd achieved his revenge, but the cost was steep, and he wasn't sure if he'd made things right or only deepened the pain. Eventually, he made his way home, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The satisfaction of exposing Claire had quickly given way to a gnawing sense of emptiness, a hollow ache that no amount of revenge could fill. When he stepped into his apartment, the familiar silence greeted him, but it felt colder, more oppressive than before. He sank onto the couch, the memories flooding him. Their last evening together, the laughter, the closeness, all of it seemed tainted now, painted in shades of betrayal and regret. He'd loved her deeply, and that love had been turned against him, twisted into something ugly and painful. The loss weighed heavily on him, leaving him with an ache he didn't know how to soothe. His phone buzzed, jolting him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Claire. "Asterisk, I lost everything today. Are you happy now? Asterisk." He stared at the screen, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to respond, to tell her that this was the consequence of her choices, that he'd only done what was fair. But another part felt a pang of regret, a small voice in the back of his mind questioning whether he'd gone too far. He typed a reply, then deleted it. There were no words that could make this right, no message that could undo the damage they'd both caused. Instead, he put the phone down and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets bustled with life, people moving on with their lives, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just hours ago. As he watched the world move on, a realization settled over him. He'd taken his revenge, yes, but it hadn't brought him the peace he'd been seeking. The pain was still there, raw and unyielding, and he knew it would take time, perhaps a long time, before he could truly let go. With a heavy sigh, he turned away from the window, his heart filled with a mixture of sorrow and resilience. He would have to rebuild his life, to learn how to move forward despite the wounds that lingered. But for now, he would take it one day at a time, learning to live with the choices he'd made and the consequences they'd left behind. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to piece his life back together. He filled his time with work, family, and friends, though a persistent ache of betrayal still lingered, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. The rush of revenge had faded, leaving him to confront the emptiness that remained. He avoided places that reminded him of Claire, but sometimes memories found him anyway. Walking by the small Italian restaurant where they'd shared their first date, he could almost hear her laughter echoing, that warm, carefree sound that had once been the center of his world. But now those memories felt cold, like relics from a life that no longer belonged to him. A few weeks passed in this haze, until one day, Daniel received a message from Claire requesting to meet. He hesitated, unsure if reopening that chapter would bring him any peace. But he knew he needed closure, something to truly let go and move forward. They agreed to meet at a small cafe on the edge of downtown, a quiet place they'd often gone to during quieter, happier times. He arrived early, his heart beating heavily as he waited. A part of him still hurt, still ached for the life they'd shared, but he knew there was no going back. Claire arrived shortly after, looking tired, a little thinner, and more fragile than he remembered. She offered him a weak smile as she sat down across from him, her eyes betraying the mix of regret and sorrow she carried. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to see me again." Daniel nodded, keeping his tone neutral. "I think we both needed this. I know I did." She looked down, twisting her hands together, as if gathering the courage to speak. "Daniel, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable. I lied to you, betrayed you, and used you in ways I can't even justify. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry." The raw sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. He felt a pang of the old hurt, but also a small flicker of understanding. "Why did you do it, Claire?" he asked softly, leaning forward. "Why go through all of this, pretending to care about me if you were so unsure?" She sighed, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I was lost, Daniel. I thought being with you would help me forget Marcus, that it would make him realize what he lost. I was selfish, and in the end, I hurt both of us. But somewhere along the way, I did start to care about you. I just got tangled in my own lies." He studied her face, noticing the faint signs of guilt and regret etched in her expression. Part of him felt relieved to hear her admit it, to hear her acknowledge the pain she'd caused. But another part knew that these words wouldn't undo the damage. "Claire," he began, his voice steady, "you didn't just make a mistake. You hurt me deeply. You broke my trust, and that's something I can't just forget. I can't pretend like it never happened." She nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I understand. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I wanted to say it, to tell you that I know I was wrong." Silence settled between them, heavy and filled with things left unsaid. Daniel felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief, as though he were finally laying something to rest. Claire had hurt him, yes, but she'd also forced him to see his own strength, his ability to heal even when he felt broken. "I don't hate you, Claire," he said finally, surprising himself with the words. "But I can't be with you. I need to move on, to find peace without carrying this with me. We both need to move forward." She looked up, her eyes filled with tears, and nodded. "I understand. I'll always be sorry for what I did to you, Daniel. I hope one day you'll find the happiness you deserve." He offered a small, sad smile. "I hope you find peace too." They exchanged a quiet, lingering look, as if sealing a silent understanding. Then Claire stood, hesitating for a moment before turning and walking out of the cafe. Daniel watched her go, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. It was truly over, and he was finally ready to move on. In the months that followed, Daniel slowly rebuilt his life. He focused on himself, nurturing old friendships, and even explored new hobbies that helped to distract him from the scars of betrayal. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but each day he felt it lessen, his heart growing lighter as he rediscovered the simple joys of life. One evening, as he sat at a friend's dinner party, he found himself laughing at a joke, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in what felt like forever. A woman named Emily, a friend of a friend, sat across from him, her warm smile and sparkling eyes captivating him. They exchanged glances throughout the night, each one sparking a small but undeniable connection. Over the following weeks they grew closer, meeting for coffee, then dinners, then long walks in the park. Emily was kind, grounded, and honest in a way that felt refreshing, a stark contrast to the turmoil he'd left behind with Claire. She didn't press him for details about his past, though he eventually opened up, sharing parts of his story. She listened without judgment, her presence a source of comfort he hadn't known he needed. One evening, as they walked through a park lit by the warm glow of street lamps, Emily slipped her hand into his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Isn't it beautiful out here?" she murmured, looking up at the stars. Daniel looked at her, his heart swelling with a quiet joy he hadn't felt in so long. "Yes," he replied softly, gazing at her face illuminated by the soft light. "It really is." Months passed, and their relationship blossomed, filled with laughter, trust, and mutual respect. Emily brought a light into Daniel's life that he hadn't realized he was missing, and together they built a new foundation, one rooted in honesty and care. Slowly but surely, the shadow of his past faded, replaced by the warmth of a new love. One day, as they strolled through the park, hand in hand, a familiar figure caught Daniel's eye. Claire stood a short distance away, looking worn and weary, as if the weight of her past mistakes had taken a toll. She met his gaze, offering a small, sad smile. "Daniel," she said, her voice hesitant. "Claire," he replied, his tone neutral. Emily looked between them, sensing the history that lingered in the air. Claire's gaze shifted to Emily, who offered a polite nod. "I'm glad you're doing well, Daniel," Claire said finally, her voice filled with regret and acceptance. "You look happy." "Thank you, Claire," he replied. "I hope you find peace too." They shared a silent moment of understanding before Claire turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing beside Emily, who squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. He nodded, looking into her eyes, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Yes," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." They continued their walk, the city lights twinkling around them as they moved forward together. The scars of betrayal had faded, replaced by the strength he gained from facing his past and the love he found in the present. As they reached the end of the path, Daniel felt a weight lift from his heart, a sense of peace that came with truly letting go. He'd endured heartbreak, betrayal, and anger, but he'd come through stronger, ready to embrace a future filled with trust, love, and hope. With Emily by his side, he knew he was finally home. A year had passed since Daniel last saw Claire in the park. Life had taken on a gentle rhythm, one that was steady and full of quiet joy. Emily had become a constant presence in his life, not just as a partner, but as his closest confidant and friend. Together, they built a relationship rooted in mutual respect and understanding, a love that felt stronger for the lessons he had learned from his past. They spent weekends exploring the city, discovering hidden corners of Chicago and making memories that slowly overshadowed the old ones. The scars from his past with Claire remained, faint but still present, a reminder of the man he once was and how far he had come. One autumn afternoon, Daniel and Emily strolled through the familiar park where they had shared so many of their early dates. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and orange, falling gently around them as they walked. They found a bench overlooking the lake and sat in comfortable silence, soaking in the tranquility of the season. Emily turned to him, her warm eyes meeting his. "You've been quiet today," she said, reaching over to hold his hand. "Anything on your mind?" Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of gratitude fill him. "Just everything," he replied, a soft smile playing at his lips. "Sometimes it feels surreal, you know, how far we've come." Emily nodded, squeezing his hand. "You deserve this, Daniel. You deserve happiness." As they sat together, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him, a contentment he hadn't thought possible after the turmoil of the previous year. He had found healing, not only through Emily's kindness, but also through his own resilience and ability to let go of the past. She had shown him that love could be simple, honest, and nurturing, that it didn't have to be a painful struggle for validation or trust. A gentle breeze blew through the trees, and Daniel turned to Emily, his heart pounding with a new sense of purpose. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You've brought light back into my world, and I can't imagine my life without you by my side." Emily's eyes filled with warmth, her smile growing as she realized what he was saying. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I love you, and I would be honored to share my life with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, elegant ring, one he had chosen carefully, wanting it to symbolize their journey and the quiet strength of their love. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his heart full. She nodded, tears in her eyes as she leaned forward, capturing his lips in a tender kiss. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." In that moment, Daniel felt as if every piece of his life had finally fallen into place. He had come full circle, finding love and trust in a way he had never imagined. The shadows of his past had faded, replaced by the bright promise of a future he was eager to embrace. As they sat together, wrapped in each other's arms, Daniel knew that he was finally home, not just in a physical place but in the sense of belonging he felt with Emily. Together, they would build a life filled with love, laughter, and resilience, a life built on the foundation of trust and mutual respect they had worked so hard to nurture. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city, Daniel felt ready to step into this new chapter, hand in hand with the woman who had shown him the true meaning of love.